We're here talking to Flow Valley professor Dan Betzler, who is the Terry M. Fisher Theater Coordinator. He's going to tell us a little about himself, how he got his start in theater, and some interesting history about Flow Valley and the theater program that you may be surprised to learn. He also gives us the lowdown about the current play he's working on that has a fascinating and unique storyline.
Okay, well, we are actually going to talk about Master Harold and the Boys. But before we start with that, I thought we might find out a little bit more about Dan Betzler.
Sure. What would you like to know? Well, I mean, I'm not going to reveal any secrets, but...
Well, are you sure? You never know. You
that's
might.
true. Maybe.
Okay. You also, though, I hear you talk about the Fox Theater and the Muni and things like that. You're involved in the theater scene in St. Louis.
I am. I actually am a sign language interpreter for Broadway shows that come through St. Louis and Chicago. So I work in both cities, and I actually interpret the shows in American Sign Language. I teach in the Deaf Communication Studies program, the theater program, and the Mass Communications program. I'm lucky enough to take skills that I've obtained from many different experiences and education, my college education, and put them together to form this great career that incorporates my skill in American Sign Language, my theater background, and my mass communications. So I've been really lucky. I'm able to do all of them here.
When did you start acting?
Here, on this campus,
Really?
in 1978. I started school in 78, and there was a deaf theater production. We used to have a huge deaf theater because St. Louis Community College of Florissant Valley was the only campus in the metropolitan area that provided interpreting services for deaf students. You have to remember this was before the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was signed in 1990. If a deaf adult wanted a post-secondary education, they came to Florissant Valley. So we had many, many deaf students on campus. And Dr. Hyger, John Hyger, was here at that time, I think, as a technical director. He saw all these deaf students and said, wow, this would be beautiful on stage, and did some research and realized that there had already been established a National Theater of the Deaf, started this deaf theater company, and he came to me and asked me if I would be interested in voicing for a deaf actor, which is like dubbing a film. You actually stood on stage. I was a servant on stage. I would be matching this deaf actor who was doing the American Sign Language, and I would be doing the English for the hearing audience. It was fascinating. It was my first time on stage. It was my first time meeting a deaf person. It was a lot of firsts for me, and I had a great experience. And it was my beginning. My theater background and my sign language background both started here on this campus.
That's really interesting. You were on the ground level of a lot of things there.
Oh, absolutely. I think it was the beginning of equal rights for deaf individuals, access to entertainment. Before that, deaf people really were not given the option to go to an acting class or to go to the Fox Theater or to go to the Muni and see something that they could see interpreted. It was an exciting time. And I met so many really skilled and talented deaf people through my years of experience, many very, very capable actors. And once they were able to have access to this art form, they just took off. And we have I teach a whole course here in Deaf Theater Studies, which is the history of deaf theater in America. And the students are always fascinated with the culture and how it all started, and actors who have been to Broadway that are deaf. It's quite a rich culture, and there's been a lot of opportunities over the years.
Now, are you from St. Louis?
I am originally from St. Louis. I was born and raised here in North County. At that time, I went to St. Dismas School, which was right on the corner of Parker and Paddock. It's now St. Rose now. I used to ride my bike to and from Florissant Valley because I was that close. I stayed here until I finished my bachelor's degree at SIU Edwardsville, and that was in theater performance. And then I moved to New York.
Yeah, hooked on theater, and then do the big time.
Yeah.
So what happened to you in New York?
Well, I went to New York. I stayed there about 2 years. My brother was in med school, and he was accepted in medical school at Albert Einstein, which is in the Bronx. And he said, Dan, why don't you come up and live with me? Well, we lived in this little apartment that was roach infested. There would be a mouse periodically running through, but it was cheap. It was medical school housing, and I got to share it with him. And so there was a piece of me, my family, St. Louis in New York with me. And I primarily auditioned, took dance classes, took acting classes, and waited tables because I had to make money. So
sure.
I waited tables on 65th and Madison. It was great. It was a great experience. I eventually came back to St. Louis when I finally figured out that I was acting more in St. Louis than I was in New York.
New York would be tough to get started in and get going, but you did get to act there, right?
I did. I didn't do any shows in New York. Now I often tell the students I think it would be a better move to go to Chicago. There's more smaller theaters that you can get a good start and a feel. Where in New York, they're mainly the Equity, which is the Actors Union. And so if you're not in the union, and most St. Louis actors don't join the union until they are sure they can get work, because once you join the union, you can't work outside the union without permission from the union. So we have a lot of non-professional theaters in St. Louis. So if you really want to perform, a lot of people wait to get their Equity card until they're going to go to Chicago or New York or somewhere where they're going to actually have the opportunity to use their card and be involved in Equity theater.
Now, I would imagine it would be a lot like anything else. The more you act in the smaller areas, not that St. Louis or Chicago are small by any means, but the more people you get to know, who know people, Same,
exactly.
right?
The networking is vital, but the experience is even more so. I think that not only do you have to have the skill, but you have to have the discipline. You have to show up on time like any job. You have to be there prepared like any job. There's certain things you're expected to do outside the rehearsal hall. That's your responsibility.
Sure. The theater people that I've met throughout the years off and on, they are very dedicated to their craft. It's an actual craft, an art form for them.
Actually, it is. There's nothing more rewarding if you do it right. I often start a year ahead of time looking into, especially if it's a period piece where it happens in a certain time period. Everything that's written is usually influenced by what's happening around it, what has happened in our society. It's just a lot of research and there's a lot being put together. Mm-hmm. What did they wear during that time period? How was their hairstyle? What kind of things did little colloquialisms, how I look at vocabulary and certain words, you'll say, oh my gosh, we don't use that anymore. Or it means something totally different than it did 20, 30, 40 years ago.
I know that you were drawn in by the deaf studies and things like that you were learning and helping with, but to keep coming back to theater, you have to have a love there. What is it about theater that draws you to it and keeps you going?
I think once it gets in your blood, it's hard to ever really, I could have chosen another profession and I still would have probably done community theater or been involved in some capacity. I always wanted to be involved with professional theater, and I did, but I think that even if I would have chose to do, I came here initially as an art major. I only went into the theater because I needed money, and that was the only work-study job available. And so I went into the theater to build sets and paint sets, and that's when I met Dr. Hyger, who said, would you audition for this show? And I was like, well, I've never been on stage. I worked all through high school. I'm one of 9 children and had, a single-parent family. It wasn't like we had a lot of money. I was like, well, I don't know how much time is it going to take and how much work, how am I going to balance my work schedule? And I went to my boss and he said, give me the rehearsal schedule, I'll work around it. It changed my whole world coming here. Mm-hmm. And once it gets in your blood, it just doesn't leave. And I would always be involved. I will always be involved in theater. It's in some capacity, whether it's coaching or doing bit parts here and there. But I have come to love directing. It's very scary in the beginning, but I do love doing it.
And do you have a favorite type of play to produce?
My favorite is, I love certain writers. I'm a real big fan of Ibsen, and actually, people used to say I was a theater snob back in the day because I wasn't a big musical theater. It wasn't until I started interpreting musical theater that I started appreciating. But I really like classical theater. There's contemporary playwrights like Neil LaBute, who writes about the not-so-happy side of human behavior. I love his stuff. So I love contemporary work because the students love contemporary work, and they get excited about doing contemporary work. I have to get them excited about some of the classical pieces.
And do you have a favorite play, just out of curiosity?
I have many favorite plays. I guess I would have to categorize them. I have certain plays that I think are just fabulous. In a contemporary play would be The Shape of Things. I directed that here in 2004 or something. Actually, the acting instructor over at Merrimack came over and acted in that for me. Musical would have to be probably Les Mis would probably be my favorite musical.
Now, you picked a play for this fall, and it's called Master Harold and the Boys.
Right.
Tell us about this play.
Well, it was written in '82 by a man by the name of Athol Fugard, and it's a South African play. It takes place in 1950 in South Africa during apartheid. So there clearly is a division of race in this particular play, but it comes at it with a really interesting perspective. It takes place in a tea room owned by this young man who's 17 years old, Caucasian. His mother runs this little tea room. and there's two middle-aged black men who work in this tea room. And it's a rainy day, so no one comes in through the whole play. These three actors take us into this world where these two black men have pretty much raised this young Caucasian, and it evolves into their relationship and what has happened in the past and how this young Caucasian becomes what he was taught.
Right. No, we have to explain a little bit, I think, about apartheid. That happened in post-World War II era in South Africa until, I believe, 1989, 1990.
Yes.
Long
Nelson
period of
Mandela opposed it and went to prison opposing it.
Right. He fought against apartheid, but apartheid was the separation by race in South Africa.
Exactly.
And sometimes they even removed people forcefully, correct?
That's correct. And they had to carry passports. Black people had to carry passports and telling them that they had the right to be where they were.
So the play is set in the beginning of that era.
1950, yes.
Okay.
And so it isn't really what I would call a political piece. There's no talk during the piece about politics, or it isn't focused on politics. It's about relationships and how the environment around them has influenced their relationship. Although these two black men have raised this Caucasian young man, what is happening in the environment is influencing his opinion on who they are and what they've done for him.
Sure. It's a human story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I'm really excited to start working on this. We're going to have to work on dialect for the black actors and for the young man Caucasian actor as well, because it has to have a specific South African dialect, and the young Caucasian actor has to have more of a British accent. So I think there'll be a lot of challenges. The stage is actually going to be built on the stage, and the audience is going to be on the stage with them. You would actually be able to put out your hand and touch one of the actors. You'll be that close as an audience member.
That would give it a whole different dynamic in my mind, a more closeness, because this is probably going to be, I would think, like an emotional.
I think that it will. Yeah, it should connect. We toyed back and forth on whether or not we should have the distance of our theater on the main stage, or whether we should bring them close. And for this particular piece, I think it's going to be more effective to have the audience close and connect with the actor.
How hard is it for an actor? Because they're going to have to bring, if they're going to have audience that close, and you want them to connect that way, they're going to have to bring out the emotion. They're going to have to bring out, the feelings of this time and the subject matter. How hard is it for them to live that, because they actually have to live that feeling?
I think it will depend on who the actors are, but I think many young black actors today don't know much about apartheid. Certainly the young Caucasian actor who's got to be late teens, early 20s to portray this character, many of them don't know. So I think we'll start with a lot of research and having them understand what is taking place. It isn't just about this relationship. There's a lot more subliminal message that's going on. Sure. In the end of the play, there's a line about, they try to resolve some of the conflicts that they've had, and Master Harold, which they call Hallie, goes out, and it's raining. It's raining through the whole play. And Sam, the older black actor, says, he calls him Hallie again after, which is kind of a term of endearment. Hallie turns back and says, well, it's still raining, and it's just kind of a metaphor for, these problems are still going on in our environment. We're never going to change the color of our skin. We're always going to have that separation because the environment has forced them to do that. The politics around them have forced them. So it doesn't just focus on the political aspects. It talks about how it's affecting everybody around. I mean, they so want to have a relationship and love each other, and they're almost like a father and son. And they're not allowed to have that relationship based on the environment in which they live, and that is so troubling.
Yeah, it sounds like a great play. Can't wait to see it. And you're looking for 3 male actors ranging from 15 to 60.
That's correct.
And that is August 14th and 15th, and the performance dates are not until the first 2 weeks of October.
That's right.
So maybe we can have you back just before, see how things are shaping up.
I would love that. I would love to bring one or two of the actors with me.
Absolutely.
That would be great to have them come and talk about their experience.
I would actually love to talk to the actors after a little bit closer to time to see how they're dealing with, because that's an emotional subject. It would be hard, and to see what they've learned and how they feel and how things are
I would
going.
love that. I would love that. It's always fun to get a different perspective. The director's perspective, the actor's perspective, the designer's perspective. It all has, that's what we try to create, the same story with all these different perspectives.
Because it's a very intimate story.
Very much so. That's my love of theater, that we have all these creative people coming together to create one story in one moment of time. And when you go to the theater, no one will experience what you just did except for the people that were in that theater at that time.
Sounds fantastic. All right, well, thank you very much for coming, and hope to talk to you again.
Thank you so much, Holly.